My daughter Karen set her coffee cup down on my kitchen table. My kitchen table, the one I built from reclaimed barnwood in 1987, and said the words she had clearly been rehearsing for weeks. "Dad, we think it's time to talk about Sycamore Ridge." Sycamore Ridge. She had already picked the facility. She had the brochure in her purse. My wife, Linda, my daughter's mother, my partner of 38 years, nodded from across the table without meeting my eyes. The nod of a woman who had agreed to something before the conversation started. I am 67 years old. I still split my own firewood. I drove to Memphis and back last October without stopping. I beat my cardiologist at chess 4 months ago, and he hasn't offered a rematch. "It would just be easier," Karen said. "For everyone." For everyone. I looked at the brochure she slid across the table. Sycamore Ridge Senior Living. Private rooms, activity programs, medication management. I picked it up. Read the first page. Set it back down. "Let me think about it," I said. That night, while Linda slept and Karen drove back to her house 20 minutes away, I opened my laptop. I changed one thing. One number. On one form. 41 days later, my daughter called me. Her voice sounded different, smaller, like something she had been certain of had turned out to be made of paper. "Dad," she said, "the mortgage payment didn't go through." "I know," I said. "I know." My name is Robert Calloway. I am 67 years old, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee, in a house I have owned for 32 years, on a street I have watched change from young families to empty nesters to young families again. I am a retired civil engineer. 31 years with the same firm, the last 12 as senior project manager. I designed bridges, not metaphorically, actual bridges, the kind people drive over every day without thinking about who calculated the load capacity. 3 of them are in Tennessee, 2 are in Kentucky. 1 is in Virginia, and I drove across it on the way to a fishing trip in 2019 and didn't tell anyone because I didn't need to. My wife Linda and I have been married for 38 years. We have 2 children. Marcus, our son, lives in Portland and calls every Sunday. Karen, our daughter, lives 20 minutes away and had apparently decided, sometime in the past year, that her proximity gave her authority over my future. I want to be precise about something before I tell you the rest of this. Linda is not a villain in this story. She is a woman who loves our daughter and who listened to Karen's concerns over many months and who, by the time of the kitchen table conversation, had been gradually convinced that I needed more management than a husband and less independence than a person. Karen's concerns were not entirely invented. I had been moving more slowly after a knee surgery in January. There had been one incident. One, where I had left a pot on the stove and gone to the garage and come back to smoke but no fire and nothing damaged. One incident. Karen had not forgotten it. She had, in fact, built an entire case around it. The case included a folder. I did not know about the folder until later. It had notes in Karen's handwriting going back 8 months. Observations, incidents, the pot. A time I repeated a story at dinner that I had told 2 weeks earlier. A doctor's appointment I rescheduled twice. My daughter had been building a file on me the way you build a file on someone you intend to act against. I found out about the folder 3 weeks after the kitchen table conversation, when I asked Linda directly whether there was documentation she hadn't shown me. She paused for exactly the length of time that meant yes. That pause told me more than the folder. 3 weeks before the kitchen table conversation, Karen had lunch with Linda. I know this because Linda told me about it later, much later, after everything had resolved and we were doing the honest accounting of what had happened. She told me because she felt I deserved the full picture and because she is, at her core, an honest woman who had been handled into a position she didn't fully examine until it was too late to pretend she hadn't been there. At that lunch, Karen had presented her concerns. The knee, the stove, the repeated story. The general thesis that Dad was declining faster than he admitted and that something needed to be arranged before there was a crisis. Linda had listened. She had not argued. She had, and this is the part that took the longest to sit with, contributed her own observations. Small things she had noticed and set aside, but had not, until Karen named them as a pattern, understood as a pattern. Karen had then said something that I think she believed was responsible and that I think was actually the thing that changed everything. She said, ____, quote, ___, 6 ___, the structure. Linda had nodded. She told me she had not understood, in that moment, what she was nodding at, that she had heard concern for the family's security and had agreed with the concern without examining what the concern was actually proposing. What it was proposing was this: that before the Sycamore Ridge conversation happened, certain financial arrangements should be updated to ensure that the primary decision-making authority over the household's assets shifted, as a precaution, reasonably, for everyone's protection, away from me. Karen had already spoken to an attorney. I did not know any of this when I sat at my kitchen table and listened to my daughter tell me it was time to talk about Sycamore Ridge. I learned it piece by piece afterward, the way you assemble a picture that was built in a room you weren't invited into. What I knew that evening, sitting across from my wife's averted eyes and my daughter's rehearsed concern, was enough. If you have ever sat at your own table and understood, in the specific way that decades of reading structures teaches you, that a plan had been built around you before you were consulted, you already know why this story exists. Subscribe and hit the bell. I'll be here every week. I am a civil engineer. I have spent 31 years reading structures. Not just physical ones, the kind made of steel and concrete and calculated load distributions. I have spent 3 decades reading the structure of decisions. Who is in the room? Who is not in the room? What was decided before the meeting started? What the meeting is actually for? The kitchen table conversation was not a conversation. It was a notification. Karen had already toured Sycamore Ridge. The brochure was worn at the corners. She had been carrying it for a while. Linda's nod had preceded my response by several seconds, which meant she had already agreed to the outcome before hearing my reaction to the proposal. The meeting was already over. I had simply not been present for the part where the decisions were made. I said I would think about it because I needed time to understand what I was actually dealing with. Not the surface of it, my daughter's concern, my wife's anxiety, a brochure for a facility with organized activities and medication management, the structure underneath. That night, I reviewed our finances the way I had been reviewing project documents for 31 years, methodically, looking for the load-bearing elements, looking for what would happen if one of them was removed or transferred or rerouted. My pension deposited into our joint account on the 3rd of every month, $3,100. From that account, the mortgage, the utilities, Karen's phone plan, which I had been paying for 11 years because she had asked once and I had said yes, and no one had ever revisited it. The insurance on her car, which she had added to our policy 7 years ago when her rates went up. Small things, monthly, invisible. Our investment account held 12 years of careful additions. Karen was listed as a transfer on death beneficiary, which was standard estate planning, not a control mechanism. But combined, the mortgage, Karen's phone, Karen's insurance, the household utilities, the dependency ran in one direction. Not me depending on them depending on me. And if Karen had spoken to an attorney about financial structure, if changes were being prepared, the window for my own move was not wide. I made one change that night. Not to take anything, not to punish anyone, to preserve the thing that the structure of that kitchen table conversation had been designed to remove. My own authority over my own life. The change took 11 minutes. I redirected my pension deposit from the joint account to a separate account I had held since 1994. A personal account, not hidden, not secret, simply unused for the last decade, because the joint account had been sufficient, and because marriage, when it is working, does not require parallel financial infrastructure. The account was current, the routing was valid. The change required a form, a security verification, and a confirmation email. I made a note of the date and time. I did not tell Linda that night. Not because I was deceiving her, because I had not yet decided what the change meant or what conversation it needed to start. I had decided only that the decision about my future was mine to make, and that making it required preserving the lever that made it mine. 3 days later, Karen called to follow up on the Sycamore Ridge conversation. I told her I had looked at the brochure and had some questions about the assessment process, and asked whether she could share the name of the attorney she had spoken to about financial planning. Silence. Then, what attorney? I said I understood she had been thinking about the family's financial structure, and that I appreciated the consideration, and that I wanted to be part of that conversation, given that it involved my pension and my accounts. More silence. Quote 8, quote 9, I said pleasantly. Quote 10. She did not answer that question directly. She said she had only been trying to help. She said the concerns were genuine. She said she loved me. I said I knew all of that. I said we needed to have a different conversation than the one she had been preparing for. I said I would like Linda to be present. We had that conversation 4 days later at the same kitchen table. If this moment stayed with you, leave me a comment. Have you ever watched someone build a plan around your life and only realized it when the structure was already standing? Tell me what you did when you understood. I read every single one. I did not move to Sycamore Ridge. I want to say that plainly and early, because I know it is what you want to know, and because everything that follows makes more sense when you know that the answer was no. The 41 days between my pension redirect and Karen's phone call about the mortgage were not a punishment. I want to be precise about this because the word retaliation has come up when I have told this story, and it is not the right word. What happened in those 41 days was not something I engineered. It was something that already existed, made visible by my absence from the system. When my pension stopped depositing into the joint account continued on its existing trajectory. The mortgage payment was scheduled from that account. The utilities. Karen's phone. Karen's car insurance. In 41 days, the joint account reached a balance that could not cover the next mortgage payment. Nobody had noticed because nobody had been managing the joint account. Linda believed I was managing it. I had been managing it. When I stopped, quietly and without announcement, the unmanaged system did what unmanaged systems do. It ran out. Karen's call came on a Tuesday morning. Her voice carried the specific quality of someone who had been very confident about a plan and had just discovered a variable they had not accounted for. I said, a pause. Longer pause. I said, silence. I waited. I said, she came to the house that evening. Linda was there. I had moved money back into the joint account that afternoon, enough to cover the mortgage, enough to restore the baseline. Because my point was not the mortgage. My point was the conversation. We had the conversation. The conversation took 3.5 hours. Not all of it was comfortable. Karen cried twice. Linda was quiet for long stretches in the way she gets quiet when she is processing something she should have processed earlier. I held my coffee and did not raise my voice, and let everything that needed to come out come out. What came out first was Karen's fear. Genuine, documented, not manufactured. She was afraid of losing me to a decline she had watched happen to her father-in-law 4 years earlier. Sudden, irreversible. A man who had been fully present and then, within 18 months, was not. She had watched her husband's family be unprepared, and she had decided, with the particular intensity of someone who has witnessed a specific disaster, that she would not let it happen to us. That fear was real. I could not dismiss it, and I did not try to. What I could not accept was the structure she had built around it. The folder, the attorney, the financial arrangement discussions that excluded me, the brochure worn at the corners from weeks of being carried in anticipation of a conversation I was supposed to simply receive. Quote 20 quote, I said. Quote 21 quote. She didn't deny it. If you were worried, I said, you could have called me. Not your mother, not an attorney, me. She said she hadn't known how. That was the most honest thing said at the table that evening, and it opened the second hour of the conversation, which was about something different, about the space between a daughter's fear and a father's pride, and the years of not knowing how to cross it directly. Linda spoke more in the third hour. She said she had been worried too, and had not known how to say it to me, and had found it easier, when Karen raised the subject, to agree rather than to redirect. She said she was sorry for not redirecting. I accepted that. Linda has always been honest with me when given the space to be. I had not created enough space. That was mine to own. At the end of 3.5 hours, we had a different structure than the one that had been built without me. Karen and I would have a direct conversation, quarterly, scheduled, with both of us present, about how I was actually doing, and what, if anything, had changed, and what, if anything, needed to be planned. Not a file, a conversation. Linda and I would review our financial documents together, as we should have been doing, and update anything that needed updating, with both of us present and both of us in agreement. Sycamore Ridge was not mentioned again. 6 months later, Karen came to the house on a Saturday, and we split firewood together for 2 hours. She is not as fast as I am. She is getting faster. I am 67 years old, and I want to say something to the people watching this who are somewhere in the range I occupy. The age where the people who love you sometimes start making plans that are about you rather than with you. The plans usually come from a real place. Karen's fear was real. Linda's anxiety was real. The concerns that get documented in folders and discussed with attorneys are usually connected to genuine observations about genuine changes. I am not asking you to dismiss them. I am asking you to insist on being in the room. Not because you are infallible, not because your judgment is perfect or your self-assessment is always accurate, but because decisions about your life, about where you live, about how your money moves, about what your future looks like, are yours to make with the people who love you, not decisions made by the people who love you and then presented to you as conclusions. The difference between a conversation and a notification is whether your response can change the outcome. At my kitchen table, my response was not going to change the outcome. The outcome had already been determined. What I did in the 11 minutes after midnight was restore the possibility of a different outcome. Not force one. Restore the possibility of one. The conversation that followed was hard. It was also the most honest conversation I had had with my daughter in years. The fear she had been carrying for months came out in 3.5 hours at a kitchen table with bad lighting and cold coffee. That fear needed to come out. It just needed to come out with me in the room. If the people who love you are making plans about your future, ask to be included. Not defensively, not with anger, with the calm directness of someone who understands that inclusion is not a request, it is a requirement. I still split my own firewood. My cardiologist still owes me a rematch at chess. Karen is coming for Thanksgiving, and she has already asked if we can split more wood. I said yes. I'll leave the good axe out for her. Hi everyone, thank you for being here. Tell me in the comments, has anyone ever made a plan about your life and presented it to you as though the decision was already made? What did you do when you realized you had been left out of the room? I read every single one. If this story reached you today, subscribe The next one will stay with you too. Robert Calloway, Nashville, Tennessee.